This is our first guest call of the year, which I'm really excited about, Frank. And I think, like a lot of people, I find myself really interested in the numbers right now. Like we always take interest in numbers. We want to know trends. We want to know data. We want to know stats. We more than anything want to know where we've been, where we are, and where we're going, right? And the numbers tell that story. I think like never before, those numbers are absolutely critical. I mean, we've had the maelstrom of numbers last year, government shutdown, the BLS person was fired, if I remember correctly. There was all kinds of things that went on that make the numbers kind of funky. And I'm sure Andrew will comment on that. But in general, I'm really interested in 2026's numbers, what the future view is, Frank, is, I mean, God, everyone on this call is making decisions and, kind of looking at 2026 in a speculative way, really wondering what's going to happen, where we are, getting our bearings. AI is in the air still. Layoffs look like they're subsiding a little bit. Maybe Andrew can shed some light on that. But anyway, Andrew, thrilled to have you here. Frank, go ahead, make your opening comments, and then we
Yeah,
can talk
definitely.
into
And welcome everybody. But I'm really excited about the call. And as we were saying on our last two calls prepping for this, this is one of those conversations that we want to get Andrew introduced and get out of his way, and everyone try to keep up with all the data coming. And this is where I think last year we had a lot of challenges, mainly from the feds, is getting to that point of having metrics-based decision making and people making all kinds of gut decisions and AI this and AI that. And now so many things people have tested out or failed, or all these activities or numbers really weren't, the way people thought, and the sky didn't fall down and all kinds of other things. We can actually get to some real information. So I think 2026 is going to be exciting. And part of that is data. And this is why I'm really excited to have Andrew on the call.
Yeah, it's great. Just a real quick plug, Andrew, and then we'll throw it over to you. I mean, both Frank and I are in the consulting business. I come at it kind of from an RPO process standpoint, recruiting TA, and Frank, of course, comes at it from that perspective, but heavy on data, heavy on systems, heavy on integration, and heavy on making sure that the process and the workflows and the actual technology stack work together in harmony. So if you ever need any services of any of that, especially in these volatile times, don't hesitate to hit me up or Frank up, and we can marshal the resources for you. So, all right, without further ado, thank you again, and feel free to obviously do a plug for Appcast or yourself, Andrew, whatever you want to do. But without further ado, sir, let's bring you aboard and get you started. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Thank you, David. Thank you, Frank. I am hoping to just share some slides and really just dive right in. Happy New Year, everyone. I'm Andrew. I'm the chief economist at Appcast. Been here about 4.5 years. And I used to be at an Indeed, in the Fed and other places. I live in the Boston area. That's me. I'll share all these slides just up front. Just want to say, hey, everyone, if you want to take a screenshot, go ahead. But if you ask if I'm going to share these slides, yes is the answer. Just one slide about Appcast. We are the largest manager of recruitment marketing media on behalf of enterprise employers in the world. And so we're the largest buyer of Indeed, the largest buyer of LinkedIn, largest buyer of ZipRecruiter. And so we've been around for about almost 12 years. We were acquired by StepStone, the kind of Indeed of Germany, so to speak, in 2019. We have over 400 employees across 12 offices. So that's Appcast. That's what we do. And so for today, I know I came aboard this group last year, and I mentioned Recruitonomics. I'm going to talk at the end about Recruitonomics, the website. But just to refresh everyone, I have this kind of stock explanation here about, well, what is Recruitonomics? Well, I'm an economist by training. We're going to talk a lot about data and the economy, a lot about what you could call capital E economics, labor economics. And Recruitonomics attempts to kind of combine that knowledge base with the really critical tactical boots on the ground knowledge of recruiters, TA and HR leaders like yourselves, and in our industry, kind of the knowledge base there as it overlaps with economics. And so one of the ways I describe this is there's factors you can control, obviously, in talent acquisition. So this middle column here, like apply process, sourcing practices, and so on. Obviously, there's a lot of things here in talent acquisition that we care about controlling, the knobs and whistles to optimize. But really, Recruitonomics, its thesis is if we focus on this box here on the left, the forces, the factors that you cannot control that are beyond anyone TA leaders' ability to affect or any company's ability to control, that, things like supply and demand labor market, which we're going to talk about, or, competition from people in your other employers in your industry, or AI trends, government policy like tariffs. So all that we're going to cover. The thesis of Recruitonomics is by focusing on these factors that you cannot control, you'll then be better able to optimize the forces you can control. So that's Recruitonomics in a nutshell. That's Appcast and me in a nutshell. Let's get right to the agenda. So it's 2026. I have a lot of material, and I want to kind of structure it like so. First, I just want to talk about where does the U.S. labor market stand at the moment. I'm going to use these two phrases. One I know a lot of you probably have heard, but the other is kind of our new updated framing. I'm going to talk about the Great Resignation transitioning into the Great Stay. So I talked about this last time. We've had more data and evidence to kind of explain what does it mean to have like a frozen labor market, or a lot of stagnation in terms of job seekers, not a lot of dynamism, or either hiring or quitting or even firing happening. So we'll talk about that transition from like a very dynamic labor market of, say, 2022 to a very static one in 2025 and into 2026. Then we're going to talk about the economic outlook in a kind of macro lens. After we talk about jobs and wages and quits and layoffs, all that stuff in the first section, we're going to talk about things like tariffs, GDP outlook, immigration impacts. All these will circle back to recruiting, right? How does the macroeconomic outlook affect talent acquisition? And how does policy out of Washington impact talent acquisition? So that's the second section. And then finally, I think really critically on everyone's minds, it's dominating a lot of popular discourse and in the TA in the recruiting tech industry is AI. And like, what's the outlook on that horizon in terms of productivity, in terms of other disruption? So that's the agenda. Let's get after it. We have, I think, David and Frank, right? We have the whole hour. So I'm going to go
Yes.
till, maybe 10 of something like that. So we'll definitely save time for
Yeah,
questions.
real quick, Andrew, just as people have questions or stuff, raise your hand if you don't mind, Andrew. If they have raise your hand, you wait till the end as well. We'll take Q&A. Use the chat bar, however you want to integrate. This is a great opportunity to
Yeah,
engage
absolutely.
directly with Andrew.
So this is a slide that was very it elucidated a lot of complexities in the labor market in 2022 and 2023 when it was a very tight labor market, when demand, which is this dark blue line, far exceeded supply. It kind of explained a lot of the challenges that TA leaders had. And so this dark blue line, this labor demand, it's what is it? Total job openings plus total employment. And if you compare that demand, right, to supply. So the U.S. labor force, everyone who has a job or who's unemployed but actively searching for work in the last 4 weeks, that's the light blue line. And so this was very illuminating when it was like clear we were in this kind of big gap between demand exceeding supply in 2022, where it was very tight. We're kind of in balance now, though. We're not on either extreme. It's not a particularly tight labor market. It's also not a particularly slack labor market. Like if you thought about, say, 2010, for example, or 2008, when we had a major recession where employment and job openings plummeted and supply far exceeded demand. So this is just kind of context here. It looks like we've narrowed this gap. It's in balance, but there's a lot of shifting dynamics that I'm going to talk through here. The first is that overall job growth has been on quite a roller coaster the past 6 months or to 9 months, really. First, we got last Friday the December jobs report. It showed at a headline level we had a modest gain of 50,000 jobs. But that really, I think, is almost the least important. That headline figure is the least important number in the whole report because there's so many cross currents underneath that headline number. Namely, the fact that government job cuts really materialized in October, November, and a little bit in December. Really, what's happened is throughout the year we've had steady job cuts. Some of that's led by the Department of Government Efficiency. Some of that really materialized in the October figures. As you see here, it's off the chart. It literally distorted all these figures when we had over 180,000 decline in federal employment, federal government employment. So really abstracting away from these distortions, I think the best chart to look at to get a headline figure is private payrolls. And what does it show? It shows that the job market is slowing, that employment is slowing. And so here's how you look at this. This is just the private sector in the US. And the blue columns are showing you the monthly change in total payroll employment. So that this does not include 1099 gig workers. This is just W-2 payroll workers, right? It's just the vast majority of the kind of payroll employment. And so when we look at this, we see, okay, well, we had 37,000 jobs added in the private sector in December. But the 3 and 6 month averages, those are the two lines that overlay these columns. You see that they're trending downward really since last spring, right? Private employment growth in the private sector is really trending downwards. It's still positive, right? For the most part, it's averaging 29,000 a month over the last over the fourth quarter, but it's nowhere near the level. It's less than half the level it was last spring. So last spring, we started to see a real downshift in employment. Now, let's kind of unpack why that is, because as just spoiler alert, as I'll get to later, no, I don't think we're like headed for an imminent recession. No, we were not in a recession in 2025. So what's slowing job growth? What's behind it? Now, one reason that job growth is slowing is that the labor force growth, as I'll get into, has been in decline, and partly due to immigration policies that we'll talk about. So because the actual amount of people to hire has been shrinking a bit, the break-even rate that we need each month to add jobs just to keep up with the population in the labor force has also been declining. So in other words, the way to think about this is that the bar for a successful jobs report has been revised lower and lower and lower as the labor force has shrunk. So this is the private sector employment figure. Back in 2023, for example, when we were adding, 150,000 jobs a month, that was like a successful jobs report because that's what was needed to keep up with all the immigration that was happening in the country at that time. Now there's a lot less immigration. There's actually a decline in the foreign-born labor force. And so this break-even rate is now not 150, 200. It's now maybe 50,000. It's kind of like what the break-even rate is. Well, what was the jobs figure in December that I just showed you? It was 50,000. So like another way to think about it is, yeah, job growth is slowing, but like the bar is being revised lower. And so like maybe we're just treading water consistently. Even if the headline figures that I showed you are going down and job growth is slowing, the labor force is also slowing. And so that's kind of like what we need to stabilize the unemployment rate. Now, when we dive into what concerns me, and this is where my first kind of big concern comes in, is the concentration of job growth is overwhelmingly in healthcare. So for 2025 as a whole, when you look at all the jobs added in the healthcare and social assistance sector, it was 97% of all gross jobs added, which is huge, right? Because there's lots of net changes that are happening. A lot of jobs are, a lot of industries are seeing job decline. So this is just for the month of December. But just to give you a sense of like how overweight we are for healthcare, we had another decently strong month for healthcare at 38,000. Leisure and hospitality, so restaurants, hotels, and so on, actually had a really strong month after having a lot of weakness. They added 47,000 jobs in December and on down the list. But a lot of these sectors have lost jobs for all of 2025, not just for this month. So manufacturing, net job loser last year. Professional and business services, the kind of white collar industry, net job loser in 2025. And I can go on. And so, first of all, the fact that a lot of our job gains are concentrated in healthcare is itself something that gives me pause. Now, one kind of tailwind that's kind of positive has been, well, okay, that's all backward looking, Andrew, all that data on employment gains. What about the future? What about actual future hiring? And so here I turn back to my former employer at the Indeed Hiring Lab. They put out great data on job postings. Indeed is the largest job board in the United States. So when they normalize this data, and here I normalize it, I index it to roughly 2 years ago. So January of 2024, that equals 100. And you see here, for the most part, from January of 2024 through, say, October, November of 2025, there's been a steady decline in job postings across the board. So the black line here is total job postings. You see how that really declined until, say, November. You see how Construction decline. No major category here. Nursing, retail, no major category is above 100. But what happened last November, frankly, around the time that the government shutdown ended, around November 13th, we started to see a rebound in job postings. So over the past 2 months, some of these, not all of them, have seen a bit of a rebound. Hospitality and tourism is very cyclical, so kind of ignore that. That's seen a plunge since the kind of holiday period. But what we've seen, there's a big spike in data center construction jobs in the green here. That's a bit anomalous. But in general, we've seen a bit of a rebound. And actually, in some of the white collar jobs that I've seen us experience a white collar recession over the past 3 or 4 years. So software development, not on this slide, but finance and banking, sales, these other kind of white collar desktop jobs have seen a bit of a rebound in November. Now, it's not huge. I don't want to get everyone's hopes up that suddenly there's going to be a resurgence of hiring in the white collar sector. I don't expect that, but there is a trend to note. If it persists, I'll update you and say we're changing our outlook. Right now, we don't expect a lot of hiring in the white collar sector, but the fact that it has a bit of a bounce is positive. So that's all about demand side, right? Employers hiring, employers posting jobs that they want to fill potentially. But let's pivot and talk about the supply side. So unemployment in December ticked down from 4.6 to 4.4 across the year as a whole. As 2025 as a whole, unemployment was up from roughly 4% to 4.4. Okay. But historically, I like to kind of zoom out and show folks that 4.4 is still pretty low. My kind of rough heuristic, just talking to like man on the street, like what's a good or bad unemployment rate? Like what's the cutoff line? My heuristic is like 5%. Meaning like this is kind of an overly simplistic way to think about it, but an unemployment rate above 5% is bad. An unemployment rate below 5% is either okay, like now, or good, as it was in, say, a few years ago. The point is, post-World War II, we've had much higher unemployment rates. So that's a kind of, every man's version of labor supply metrics. This is a little bit more of a mouthful, but I like looking at prime age labor force participation. And so what is that? It's 25 to 54-year-olds, the share that are either working or searching for work. And so here's the story, folks. People are working or looking for jobs. We're not in like the 2010s anymore, where there was just this mass section, a few percentage points of the entire population that was just like out of the labor force. We've seen a resurgence in people engaged in work, either through actual employment or looking for it. So it's around 84%. Again, I like to look at this cohort of 25 to 54-year-olds. It kind of controls for the aging population. It controls for typically younger people who may be in higher education and therefore out of the labor force. So it's not like at a high level, there's suddenly been this drop in the labor force. There has, though, in particular, been a drop with foreign-born workers, as we'll talk about in the section on immigration. But first, this is the kind of key takeaway. Okay, I told you the high-level takeaway around demand and high-level takeaway around supply. But remember I said it's been a shift here from a great resignation story of a few years ago to a great stay. And another way I kind of, jokingly show this is the Jack Nicholson, image here from The Shining of like, is it frozen? Is the labor market really frozen? And so here's the kind of key chart that we've been monitoring for the past really year and a half. And it's showing you the main flows that happen in the hiring economy. So the top line is the hire rate. That's our business, right? If you're in talent acquisition, everything we do can be distilled into this orange line. The orange line is the hire rate. It's the number of hires made as a percentage of employment in the US. And you see here, there was this super sharp spike in the immediate 2020 post-COVID period where people were rehired after the shutdowns. And then there was this big hiring boom, unlike we've seen in decades. In 2021 and 2022 and part of 2023, you see the hiring rate was at 4.5%, just well above the pre-COVID benchmarks. That's what you see here in the dashed lines. So hiring has been on the decline, though, for the past 3 years. It's been steadily declining. And so now the hire rate is at its lowest point in over a decade. So we had this kind of like, we're kind of suffering the hangover of this binge of hiring post-COVID is really my kind of colloquial way of saying this. But when I talk about the great stay and how employers are not hiring, it's a low hire, but it's also a low fire economy. I also point your eyes down to the bottom to the purple line. Look at the layoff rate here. That's the purple line. It's also below the pre-COVID benchmark. So if you look at the purple line and you scan to the left back to say 2008 to 2010, that's a recession. When you see the layoff rate spike up, that's a recession. We haven't seen um, employers lay off workers en masse. We've seen those employers not hire. So it's a low hire, low fire economy. It's a great stay, in other words. But it's not just a great stay on the employer side. Look at the middle line here, the dark blue line. It's also a great stay for the job seeker. So this is the quits rate. So this is where the origination of the term, the Great Resignation, came from, right? You see how the dark blue line in 2021 through 2023, it also peaked. There was lots of churn, lots of dynamism, workers quitting jobs. Well, that's really subsided. People are frankly grateful to have a job now. And as you'll see, they're not switching for better pay because the wage rates for job switchers and job stayers is the same. Now, what does this all have to do with talent acquisition? I'm showing you here a scatter plot that charts two things. On the y-axis, the vertical axis here on the left, it's the job openings rate, which is basically to say, just as I showed you in the previous slide, the hire rate, the quits rate, and so on. This left axis here, the y-axis, the vertical axis, is showing you how many jobs are being posted, basically, in the economy. How many openings do we have as a share of total employment? And then the x-axis, rather, the horizontal axis, is showing you the cost to actually, in terms of recruitment marketing media through the Appcast platform, the cost to actually get a single application in dollars. And so there's a strong correlation here that, like, during the peak Great Resignation, when there was lots of job openings, there's a lot of competition for talent, as you would expect, really high CPAs. Now it's the opposite. Now we're in the great stay. You see, all the data points are kind of clustered along 2024 in this present period, where what I'm showing you is the monthly data points, these square boxes. And what I'm showing you is basically like the less jobs there are to post, the less hiring there is to happen, the cheaper the recruitment marketing costs are, as you would expect. So that's why it matters. Now, while there's not a lot of layoffs, what's happening is it's hard to break in. So it's kind of, even though the unemployment rate's low at 4.4%, if you have a job, you're grateful for your job, there's not a lot of layoffs. But if you don't have a job, so say you're a new college graduate, say you're a new immigrant arriving, to break in and find a job, it's hard. So when you see that pain on LinkedIn, that's true. That can be consistent with everything I've said, because the job finding rate has been trending downwards, right? To break into this frozen labor market is also hard. Now, what this does, though, it hurts the youngest workers the most. What I've seen here is basically you have to squint really hard. I'm seeing almost no change in the unemployment rate for prime age workers. That's the light blue line, 25 to 54-year-olds. It's basically flat. It's really low, below 4%. If you squint, look at the older workers, 55 and older, the orange line, the unemployment rate, basically flat. Almost all of the rise in the unemployment rate is happening among 16 to 24-year-olds, these entry-level workers. That's why it's hard to break in. It's hard to get a job. But also, as I'll share later in the hour, AI is having a bit of a displacement effect for entry-level white-collar workers coming out of college. So this is what I just said. I'm going to kind of move through, but basically, like, the whole Great Resignation's over. The Great Stay means that the wage growth rates between job switchers, which is the blue line, and job stayers, which is the orange line, they've converged. It used to be back in 2022 that, like, you were going to get higher pay by going elsewhere. You were going to get a better offer elsewhere because the labor market was so tight, hiring was so intense, you can get better pay. But now these have converged because there's just not a lot of hiring, not a lot of poaching, a frozen labor market. Overall wage growth, though, it is starting to flatten out, normalize from all the volatile period of COVID, as you see here. Lots of wonkiness happening during those years. It's at a structurally higher level, though. Wage growth is more in the 3.5–4% range rather than the pre-COVID 2–2.5% range. Why is that? Inflation's higher today. So this is all nominal wage growth. That means it's not adjusted for inflation. It's not real wage growth. So nominal wage growth has ticked up a bit from, say, 7–8 years ago. What does this have to do with TA and frankly with HR leaders? If you think like, oh yeah, as a baseline, I'm expecting 2–3%, bumps in comp, COLAs for my employees. Well, no, that was more of the 2018, 2019 world. Now it's more 3–4%. So this is the key takeaways. I'm not going to read them back to you. This is for when I share the slides, so you can kind of have a narrative to kind of take and share maybe with other stakeholders. These are the risks to this kind of situation that we're in. I think, we're going to talk about this. I'm going to reference this slide later, but like, we're going to have major risks from AI, from higher prices, and from trade. But first, to kind of like set the stage here and summarize the labor market, I want to pivot and kind of talk about the real economy. And by the real economy, I mean like the macro landscape and how policy impacts that. So the first, if I look back on 2025, the one word that comes out, the first thing I'll think of, frankly, is tariffs. So what does tariffs have to do with talent acquisition and hiring? It has a lot, actually. So first of all, we saw this enormous spike last spring when the new Trump administration came out with, in April, their Liberation Day, reciprocal tariffs to over 100 countries. These tariffs, as you'll see in just a second, were dramatically higher than anything we've seen in 80 years. And so this caused a lot of economic uncertainty as measured by this index, which basically crawls news reports, talks about mentions of tariffs and trade wars and so on. And so, okay, what does uncertainty mean for hiring? Well, it damages business confidence to make predictable investments in the future. That's what this does. It's come down a lot, though. A lot of this trade uncertainty is not fully resolved. We're actually waiting probably this week, as soon as tomorrow, for the Supreme Court to release their verdict on a case whether the president has the authority under IEEPA, these emergency economic powers, to have reciprocal tariffs. The expectation, according to betting markets, according to other legal experts, is that the Supreme Court will strike down and limit the president's power with tariffs, but who knows? Let's see. If that happens, this will actually probably boost equity markets, stock markets. You'll see a lot of like positivity among business leaders, frankly, is that if that tariff authority gets taken away. But the real reason this matters for talent acquisition is like, if this was not a small change last year, right? The 2025 retrospective is maybe this single chart is like the president remade the global economic order is what happened. Our average tariff rate is the highest it's been since 1938. And it abruptly shot up in a matter of a few months last year. So it's a deglobalizing world. We've had 3 or 4 decades since the Cold War where we've globalized. That's been deflationary. It's lowered prices through trade and through higher immigration. And that has been going into reverse the past few years. Actually, you can argue the past decade from Brexit and the President Trump's first election onward, but especially last year, we are now in a deglobalization period. That's an inflationary period. So tariffs are up dramatically. All right. What did that do? First, when it happened, there was a big shock to consumer confidence. So here's measures of, consumer surveys from the Conference Board or from the University of Michigan. These are 2 monthly indicators. You see how they both sharply nosedive in April. They have kind of a dead cat bounce. They kind of come back up in the summer, and then they kind of tick down lower and lower through the year. What's interesting about this is like people's vibes, consumers' sentiment is negative and bad. But as you'll see, the economy's been really resilient in terms of consumer spending. People have been spending money, like corporate profits are strong, GDP, as I'll show you, is strong. I'm kind of stepping on my material here, but there's a disconnect here between people's vibes about the economy versus their actions. They're actually like spending money and expecting things to be fine, even though when they tell surveys, I'm worried about AI, I'm worried about business uncertainty, and this kind of all this stuff I'm reading in the news scares me. So there's lots of uncertainty, even if actions don't reflect it. Bottom line is tariffs mean higher prices. I'm not going to, I talked about this a lot last year. I'm not going to repeat myself, but this is the 2025 retrospective. We know we've seen and expect further price increases in the supply chain. We've seen it in coffee and beef. We've seen it in steel. We've seen it in a number of goods that we purchase. Tariffs basically are a tax on imports. So what's happened to actual inflation? Even though these consumer prices have started to rise a bit, it hasn't, but it's a one-time effect. So these tariff impacts are inflationary, but they're not like a structurally balloon pushing upward inflation like the wage inflation we saw in 2022 was. So look at this. This is the the Federal Reserve, our nation's central bank. This is their preferred gauge of inflation. It's called PCE. It's different from the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, that figure that came out this morning, which, by the way, was quite weak, below 3% inflation. But what the Fed wants to see is 2% inflation. And it's kind of come down a lot from the heyday of 2022. But it's just stubbornly above that target. It's just a little bit above. So I'm not saying the Fed has revised its target to 3%, but that's basically what we're on. We're a little bit below 3% these days. We're not at 2%. And so there's a kind of battle of wills happening at the central bank, as we can talk about. That's been in the news a lot this week as well. Um, so we have this kind of macro outlook that's about tariffs and uncertainty. It's about, okay, inflation has come down, but it's still stubbornly high. And how's actual GDP evolved? GDP has basically been remarkably strong. I want to kind of hone in on this chart. This is my kind of favorite chart when it comes to GDP. It's, I don't want to complicate the figure like I was showing you before, where it's showing you all the different components of GDP. This is what I roll up in what I call underlying GDP. This is over 80% of GDP is basically consumer spending and business investment. So I'm removing some very volatile categories that include government spending, that include inventory changes, trade adjustments. So this is 85% of our economy. And I don't see a slowdown, folks. Through Q3, we saw 3% growth in underlying GDP. So this is a pretty strong economy, right? And like, why? And what's happening is consumers are spending money. I stepped on this earlier when I said, what's powering the GDP figures? It's like, look at this chart right here, this blue section here in Q3. We had 4.3% growth in GDP in Q3. Much of it is this dark blue section, consumer spending. So why is consumer spending so strong? Well, after adjusting for inflation and after adjusting for taxes, real disposable income, yeah, it's going okay. It's fine. It's at 1.5%. That's the blue line here. But the spending has outstripped that. So basically, people have negative sentiment, negative vibes about the economy. They're spending money really strong, actually outspending their income here. You see the orange line. This is all adjusting for inflation, folks. So like the year-over-year change in spending is outpacing their income. So what are they doing? They're basically they're banking that, well, inflation's going to go down in the future. So my real earnings, this blue line, is going to move up because I'm expecting inflation to come down from this kind of post-COVID inflationary spike. Or I'm expecting, the debt and consumer credit that I'm accumulating to kind of resolve itself in the future. I'll pay down that kind of like higher level spending that I'm running above my income. Well, that can only happen if the labor market stays strong. So far, it has, right? There hasn't been a lot of layoffs yet. There hasn't been a big increase in the unemployment rate. But if that breaks, if suddenly there isn't a spike in layoffs, suddenly there is a slowdown in growth, which we'll talk about those risks. I mentioned them earlier. That's where this can start to bite really fast. And suddenly people pull back in spending dramatically because they realize that they've gotten in over ahead of their skis. So now I want to pivot and talk about a second big policy impact. I've talked about tariffs. I've talked about like the GDP outlook. I want to pivot and talk about one of the big changes of 2025 and what we look forward to in 2026 as having a huge impact on talent acquisition is immigration. And just to kind of go back, let's take a time machine here back to 2023 and 2024. There was just an enormous surge of immigration. It impacted our population to the order of 3 million people over a few years during the Biden administration, during the years of, say, 2021 through 2024. So a huge surge in immigration. It revised up our population estimates. And then now suddenly we've seen a huge reversal of that. So in 2025, one method of immigration, this is not the only, there's visa, green cards, there's ways to get in legally, but there's also kind of undocumented immigration. And one proxy for that is this data from the CBP, the Southwest Land Border Encounters. So this is basically people apprehended who may be claiming asylum or putting in status as a refugee, or maybe just trying to get across the border without documentation. These are these encounters, and you see that they're down over 90%. Now, this actually predated a bit the election of 2024. It came, frankly, when Biden in June of 2024 started to actually change policy. Too little, too late to win the election, but definitely had a huge impact, and then has only continued under the new second Trump administration. So we've seen a huge decline of people coming in. We've actually seen a huge ramp up, as we all know, from very contentiously in the news, ramp up of deportations. So what this has done is it started to lead to pretty big declines in the foreign-born labor force. This is what I showed you earlier. I showed you how, the labor force participation is hanging out there, right? Because most of our labor force is domestic born, but the foreign born labor force is starting to decline. And we're going to actually get new adjustments. These figures, these bars here on the far right, are actually going to get revised remarkably lower. We're going to get these new population adjustments next month from the Census Bureau. Because basically what we're realizing is we don't know the real-time effect in 2025 of deportations, of the decline in border encounters. We don't really know the impact on population until the lag comes, until February of the next year. So we're going to learn, I can bet the house that a lot of these blue columns are going to turn negative for the past 6 months. So what does this mean? What does this immigration sea change? Truly a big change, just like with trade and tariffs. What does this immigration change mean for talent acquisition? Well, let's look at the stock of foreign-born workers. This is I'm gonna grant you this. This is a bit of a not red herring, but this is it takes some explaining. This is data from 2023. It's looking at foreign-born workers in the U.S. What broad sectors they work in. Just the raw number, not as a share. You see education and health services is the biggest, and then professional and business services is the second biggest. So these are like very, let's be honest, highly educated, white collar in some cases jobs. They employ the most foreign-born workers. Okay. But this chart is not claiming that these are legal or illegal workers, whether they're documented or undocumented. This is just whether they're foreign-born. When you look at the actual estimates on people who are undocumented, who are at risk of deportation or have been deported, or who are not coming in terms of the new flow of workers, this industry list is not representative of that group. It's far higher on agriculture, construction, food service, manufacturing. So at a high level, a lot of these workers we're looking at in this chart are here legally, are here with visas, right? They're here with working their way towards citizenship. But it's going to have a pretty dramatic impact. And the way we've modeled it, the economists at Appcast have modeled, how does it impact the full labor force in 2026? And what we model is, these are 4 different scenarios, ranging from a moderate decline in the labor force to a more extreme decline, right? And so let's just kind of split the middle here and take the average of the 2 medium scenarios. You're looking at something like a 700,000 person decline in the labor force. That's what we estimate is going to be the impact next month when we see the new population adjustments, when we see these figures turn negative here. We expect that, like, for the first time, maybe in the United States history, our population is going to decline. 2024 to 2025, our total population is going to decline. So even though the job market is slowing, as I talked about at the beginning, even though hiring demand, we're in this great stay, the pool of workers is dwindling. And so that has major implications for TA, for higher recruiting costs. Let me wrap up this section so we can get to AI and then get to questions. So to wrap up this section, let's look forward. What's the impact for 2026? The impact is there's tailwinds and headwinds. That's where I would focus your eyes here. Is like the positives of 2026, as I'll talk about in just a second, are all the AI investment happening, plus the full impact of the one big beautiful bill, household and business tax cuts. So lower tax cuts this year. Also, we just saw the Fed cut interest rates by three times at the end of 2025. So lower interest rates, tax cuts, and AI investment. Those are all kind of boost. What are the headwinds to the economy? Lower immigration and an aging population mean dwindling labor supply. Remember what I showed you about how the break-even rate for job growth, it's getting revised lower. So there's just fewer people to hire. Second, higher inflation, right? Remember deglobalization, tariffs are a tax on imports, all these forces that are boosting up prices to that 3% range instead of 2%. And then, of course, there's the AI bubble risk. So bottom line is futures markets are expecting a lot fewer rate cuts. So people ask me all the time, they shouldn't ask me this, but they ask me, Andrew, when should I refinance my mortgage or something like that? I'm not a housing economist. I'm not a real estate agent. But like, look at the futures markets. They only expect maybe 1 or 2 rate cuts this year. Because again, there isn't a bloodbath of a recession, which would necessitate a lot lower rates, nor is there like all clear on the inflation front. Inflation's still a little elevated, so we don't want to cut rates too much. But either way, however you slice it, let's say it's, if you really want to refinance your mortgage and you hope there's a whole percentage point of rate cuts this year, okay? We're still looking at rates in the 2.5% range. The era of these, 3% mortgages, the era of like ultra zero but basically ultra low, near zero interest rates on the short end. That is not coming back, bar a recession, bar a massive decline in the economy. You're not going to see those low interest rates again anytime soon. So let's wrap up the next 10 minutes. Let's talk about AI, and we'll save the last 10 for questions. So AI, obviously, this is the topic du jour since November of 2022, when ChatGPT took the world by storm, and everyone and their mother is talking about generative AI and large language models and AI agents. And okay, let's just kind of take stock of it with real data. And so the census does an interesting survey of businesses where they ask them about, like, okay, are you actually going to use AI? Not like, are you interested in it? And like, have you used ChatGPT to like research kids' summer camps or something? But like, are you actually deploying it in your business? And what happened was in 2023, despite that was AI was a very hot topic in 2023, maybe 7% of businesses were going to actually use it in a concrete way. Well, last year in 2024, in 2024 that changed. It started to rise and kink upwards, and then in last year it started to accelerate. So 2025, the rate of adoption and deployment of AI started to increase even higher. Now we're basically within 2 years, we've doubled the share of businesses who are deploying AI. Roughly 14, and this includes all the mom and pop small businesses, retailers. This includes every kind of business that may or may not need AI. We're seeing 1 in 7 of them concretely deploy AI. So that's interesting. But here's the more amazing chart, maybe my favorite chart in the whole presentation. We all hear about data centers and the build out by Meta and Alphabet and OpenAI and and Nvidia chips, and how Nvidia is a $5 trillion company, and how we're building data centers, and they're sucking up energy cost. Yes, this is a boom, but I don't think I quite realized how big a boom it is. So the orange line here is data center investment. And you see it's basically gone asymptotic. It's gone straight up, vertical. We're at a point this year where total investment in dollars for data centers is maybe going to eclipse all investment in office buildings in this country. So that's the blue line. The blue line here, we don't even have a full historical data series for the data center investment period. It was below $2 billion for a decade ago. Now it's at $41 billion and may eclipse total office non-residential construction investment. So, okay, this is a big boom. We all are aware of that. So what? The specific component about it that's really interesting is, for decades and decades, what was happening was business private, this is called the private sector, right? So when you adjust it for inflation, it's called real. So real private investment in fixed assets has shifted from investing heavily in software to investing more in actual equipment. So like, actually, it's funny. This is my kind of cutesy takeaway. AI, one of its biggest impacts on our lives in the coming decades is actually it's going to make our lives much more material and social. Like, meaning a lot of our commerce is going to be directed towards building data centers, buying chips and computers, and a lot of the jobs are going to be built towards providing care for people, education or healthcare or consulting and advice. And like, that's the ironic thing, is it's actually going to make us a lot more personable. And we've seen this in a lot of other studies recently. This is economics 101. It makes the premium on social and communication skills actually even higher, because it's so good at coding. It's so good at other computational tasks. So what we do see, though, is all these AI skills that are on the frontier. So like machine learning engineers, people with deep learning, neural nets expertise, people who are real AI experts or data scientists. These highly, there's a whole arms race happening where we've seen some of these workers get paid what professional athletes get paid, $100 million contracts for the best AI researchers at the top labs. So this is a global phenomenon. When we look at the Indeed data I showed you earlier, the share of jobs that are mentioning these high-level AI skills are just going very vertical over the past few years in Ireland, in Australia, in Germany. And if anything, the US is a bit of a laggard. Only, quote unquote, only, scare quotes, 4.2% of all US jobs postings mention these high-level AI skills. But that's still a lot. That's a lot. And the only reason it declined a bit in 2022 and 2023 was because we were hiring for retail and truck drivers and all kinds of other, there was just a hiring boom that made the share of this go down. So really big sea change, both on the kind of investment front and tangible assets, the build out of data centers, but also on the labor market side. And so that naturally leads to this question inevitably. Well, is generative AI automating away these jobs? And so here's my kind of cute C chart. I don't actually believe this. This is an anecdote, but like this is call center employees. I'm just charting for you the number of call center employees since 1990. And the vertical line here, of course, is November 2022 when ChatGPT is launched. And you see, yeah, okay, to be fair, this figure was declining before. There's also offshoring that's happening for call center employees, but there's a precipitous decline that happens after. Okay, it seems like a job that economists have long speculated could be substitutable for a lot of large language model chatbots, basically. That's a kind of cutesy anecdote, but here's some real research. This comes from the Stanford Digital Economy Lab. Late summer, they released this study where they partnered with ADP, the payroll processor, and they basically looked at headcount growth in jobs that were either more exposed to AI, which is the darker the line here, or the less exposed to AI. So let's say you're a registered nurse or you're a CDL driver, you're going to be very faint. You're going to be in those jobs that are not very exposed to AI. If you're a software developer, if you work in, God forbid I say this, but talent acquisition, or if you're an economist, maybe you're more exposed to AI, right? You're the darker line. And so what they found was overall, the more exposed job you were into didn't see a big change in headcount. But what happened was it was whether you were in an exposed job and a young person. So this is just for the early career, 22 to 25-year-olds. These are kind of entry-level college graduates, right? This is what I alluded to earlier. Basically, companies said, wait a second, drafting emails and reports, doing basic data analysis in PowerPoint and Excel work. Do we actually need to make these new hires of 23-year-olds? Or could we just like have our existing, somewhat tenured employees do this with Claude Code or with Gemini or with Copilot, right? Like that was with OpenAI. And the answer seems to be, yeah, a little bit. Yeah, is this causing a recession? No. Is this the only explanation for why it's hard to get a job for young people? No. Interest rates and the broader economy have a lot to say about that too. But AI is having an impact. And so finally, where I started with in this section was, well, what's the big picture AI impact? It's going to come through productivity growth, right? Electrification, the automobile, the personal computer, the internet, any of these transformative general purpose technologies, ultimately you got to see the numbers in the productivity data that we're doing more with less. That's actually the whole story of progress. It's why us on this call, we're not like threshing wheat, right? And like pulling vegetables out of the ground like we would be 300 years ago. So that's progress. Higher labor productivity and automation is literally progress. So here's the question. Let's go through the regimes of productivity growth since World War II. And you see that for the first 2 or 3 decades after World War II, we had really high productivity growth. From 1947 to 1973, we almost had 3% average annual gains in productivity. That's your output per hour, literally GDP per person per hour. Okay, that's really strong productivity growth. Then we had kind of a static period. So think of like the first post-World War period as like the black and white TV era. That was a big improvement from radio, right? That's a big improvement. But then think of like the second period, 1973 to 1996. Think of that as like the color TV era. Lower productivity growth, only 1.5% during the 70s, 80s, 90s. A color TV is nice. It's not a huge change over a black and white TV. Sure. Okay. Then you have this third era where the kind of the dot-com boom starts to kick in, personal computers, the internet takes off. So 1996 to 2008. Wait a second, you're having plasma TVs, you're having Netflix. Okay, that's a higher level productivity growth, 2.6% era. That's great. Then we have a giant financial crisis, a recession, and we have Twitter and TikTok and some improvements, but basically from 2008 to 2019, we see a lot lower productivity growth. And so economists, we're kind of on pins and needles right now. We're waiting. Okay, when is AI going to take off? Is it going to unleash massive productivity? And folks, last Thursday, we got Q3 productivity growth, and that's just 1 month. And these data, look at this data. It's very volatile. You have to smooth it over years, if not decades, to get any kind of signal. But the story of Q3 last year is 5% annualized productivity growth. So there's starting to be some kind of wait a second thinking happening here of like GDP is up, job growth is down. So to summarize my whole presentation, 2025 saw slowing job growth, really good GDP growth. How does that add up? It adds up through higher productivity. So I'm tentatively bullish that AI is going to have a boost to productivity. It is going to have a growth impact for the positive. Again, to be full disclosure, I'm long free markets, long the US. I think that technological innovation is good for us. So that's my kind of ending point here. To summarize, we're at 150 exactly. I'll open it up for questions. This is the 4 key takeaways. Number 1, slowing job gains. Number 2, the great stay. Number 3, 2026 is very uncertain. I mentioned all the different headwinds, right? There's stagflation, there's the AI bubble that could burst, there's greater tariff trade wars potentially on the horizon. But so far, the tracking estimates for GDP are quite good. And then finally, this AI adoption key takeaway here is that like it seems to be that while there isn't massive disruption to the labor market, there is a boom in productivity on the horizon. So before we go, I just want to plug Recruitonomics.com. That is the website that I am the director of with my other economist. It's now on Substack, so you can subscribe. This is totally for free. We give weekly emails to your inbox of content where we cover not just the US. I have a London-based senior economist who covers with his team a lot of markets in EMEA. So that's my kind of plug for Recruitonomics.com. And I know I'm 1 minute over, but it's 1:51. Let's open it up for Q&A.
That's great. Wow. I mean, there's just so much I think to unpack here. You just put a fire hose to us. Yeah, phenomenal. Like last year, I got to just process. I'm sure I'm not alone in processing everything we just learned. I'm going to start throwing stuff at you, Andrew. And people can raise your hands if you want to go live. Patrick pointed out that consumer spending is up because of the tariffs and the costs. Can you comment on that? I mean, would that account for the consumer spending if costs, but it doesn't square with inflation, does it?
So consumer spending has been strong this year, even if you adjust for inflation. That's true. Tariffs have had a pass-through impact of raising prices. That's also true. So, what was the question again from Patrick?
Well, I think the initial comment was consumer spending is up because of the tariffs, that the tariffs are causing prices to
No,
go
I
up.
wouldn't say
But that
that.
doesn't square with the inflation numbers, does it?
No, I wouldn't say tariffs called consumer. Tariffs are a tax on imports. They're going to raise prices. Raising prices is not a boost to consumer spending. Tariffs have raised prices, but we've also seen the underlying spending by households outstrip even their labor income. And so that's driven a lot of the strong GDP figures. Now, part of this is a composition effect. Now, what do I mean by a composition effect? You may have heard this term a K-shaped economy, meaning that like roughly the estimates are the top 20% of all households in terms of the top 20% of income earners power 80% of consumer spending. 80% powered by the top 20%, and the top 10% of households power the 50% of consumer spending. So what's happened is despite rising prices from tariffs, in aggregate, consumer spending has been strong. But what's driving that? It's not the average median household is spending a lot more than they were. It's particularly the top 20 and top 10% of households that are the bigger spenders just in aggregate that are driving a lot of that spending. They're shrugging off the impact of tariffs and they're still spending.
Awesome. I mean, I think a lot of questions are about, where does this go from here? And I'll just recap an answer I think I heard you say is positive. Like I think, guys, what we're gonna have to do is like rethink the kind of skills we're hiring, right? We used to be like Java programmers, that kind of thing, and just rinse, repeat. I'm hearing data centers, energy, of course, energy. Don't forget the power needed to drive these things, the machine learning language, the data scientists. There's going to be a lot of, and this is the question, there's going to be a lot of new jobs, right, Andrew? And there are a lot of new professions, like all other waves, which you commented on, created. I'm mindful of the mid 90s that we don't yet kind of see clearly yet, right?
Thank you, David, for saying that. Yes, people get very fearful of like the Luddites that technology it's called a lump of labor fallacy. That there's only so many jobs and so much work to do, and if we automate some of that work, then like that means less jobs for people. Oh no. Well, actually, a great study by probably my favorite labor economist, David Autor at MIT, looked at like the census from 1940, 1950, 1960 when they looked at the jobs that people did. You know, 80 years ago. And they said, well, what percentage of those occupations are even around today, or vice versa? What percentage of occupations today weren't even in the census back in 1940? And what he found was something like 60% of all occupations done today did not exist back then. There's actually more yoga instructors today in America than there are coal miners. People don't realize that, like, could you went back to something like in 1940 and told someone, well, you could be a yoga instructor, they would be like, what are you talking about? I don't even know what that is. There's jobs that do not even exist yet that AI is going to transform and change that are coming in the coming years and decades. So yes, but the other thing that you said, David, I just want to comment on, which is really important, which is like, so what does this mean for like I get asked also, like, people who have teenagers and college age kids, like, should they study computer science? Like, that's bad, right? Or like, what should they do? And I think what you said is like, yeah, we got to prepare for a future. David, you just said, like, with data centers and doing stuff. I think that is right. That, like, there's a transition from, we've told American college students or high school students for decades, go to college, learn to code, and they have. And now we suddenly have these generative AI tools that automate a lot of like knowledge work at a basic level, not at a complex level, but at a basic level. Okay. But then there's this huge dearth of people to actually do the standing up jobs, not the sitting down desktop knowledge work jobs, but like healthcare has been exploding and is even harder to hire for a reason. Those jobs, it's not that they're AI proof. Yeah, that's part of it. It's also just that, like, the pipeline of people who went into college were like, I'm going to study finance and computer science and economics, and they weren't studying like necessarily to be a physical therapist or an occupational therapist, or at least relative to the demand for that work. It's just exploding, especially like the skilled trades and doing actual work, like standing up work. There's just like, who's going to do the work? That native born population is extremely, I'll use the word old, that does these kind of production occupations. And as they age out, if we're not going to have immigrants to come in and replace them, that's where the puck is going. David, is like, when I tell these parents of college age, you know, students, like, study stuff that like you can do, and there's plenty of that work to go around.
How about that? Yeah. How much sentiment?
And I'm sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Just one more quick one, Frank, and I'll throw it to you. I mean, there's so much. We can go on forever. And we might go over a couple minutes, Andrew, if that's okay, just to
Sure,
bring
I'm
closure
fine.
to this. We're not too long, but sentiment on the buy side. Someone asked in the group, basically, what is the enterprise saying? Are they planning on hiring this year? And that's a message really important to this audience as we consider, our profession in 2026. Do you think this is going to translate into actual hiring that this group can help support? I know that's a tough question, but I mean, is
For
it net?
me, it depends on the industry. If it's in healthcare, defense, or aeronautics, or in specialized AI data center companies, yes, there will be quite a lot of hiring in those healthcare, defense, AI related employers. Everything else, no, I don't think there's going to be a lot of hiring this year in retail,
Yeah,
and
makes sense.
finance, and other industries.
Uh, Frank, do you want to sneak something in before we go to Mussman?
And then we'll go Mussman. Sure. So, Andrew, awesome job. Thank you for this and love all the data. When you were showing the graphic of the data center investment versus the office space investment, at some point in time, someone's going to do some math to say, hey, the processors, the server farms that we put in these data centers, when we replace them, we now have orders of magnitude greater capability in the same space or in less space. We don't need the acres of computing that we needed years ago. We now can do it on a little tiny rack. So if this starts to level off, does that investment go away? Or do you think then, okay, they're now going to do something with office space or do something different with it?
Yeah, I'm not a like I'm not the world's foremost expert at this, so like I want to caveat my answer to that. But my understanding is that the calculus is that the land is cheap, the build out is cheap. Over the lifetime of these data centers, the expensive constraints are, number one, the cost input of electricity, number one, and number two, the constraint of, do we have enough compute to get the training of these large language models done. And right now, that second constraint is the biggest one. So if you're Sundar Pichai, if you're Sam Altman, if you're any of these like Mark Zuckerberg, if you're any of these titans of tech, your biggest constraint in terms of cost is not like how much you're shelling out for these data centers and land or even electricity yet. That's a kind of operating expense that you'll be attuned to in the years to come. It's more like I don't have enough compute to train these models. So like it's almost cost be damned at this moment. It's kind of like an arms race where it's like the Manhattan Project of like, you want to be the first person to build that most powerful system. And so you're kind of like cost be damned until that. That's my understanding of their calculus.
Okay. Hey, appreciate it. Now let's go over to Muskman.
Yeah, so Andrew, great job. This is not the first time I've listened to you go through this, so this is really great information. But to David's point, I think this is a positive for talent acquisition, right? Because maybe we're not going to get a lot more jobs, but it's going to be harder to recruit them, which means the skills that we have are going to become much more valuable as we kind of go through that. So I just wanted to point because we don't even know about some of the jobs that we're going to have to recruit for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years as we go through that. But one thing I do want to ask you about is there is a cycle right now of investment in hardware, but eventually, how do we apply that hardware and building like applications, to do that? I think that's where the X factor is in terms of how is this technology going to be used? How are you going to apply it? Because once you get the infrastructure and the hardware set up, now you have to find ways to apply it, which is either something we're going to do through software or applications, or through the human intelligence portion of it. I don't know, do you have a thought on that in terms of what's next once we get over that hardware wall? What's next?
That's right. I agree with what you said, Bill. And to say it back to you so I understand, because I think I understand you and I agree. The 2 points you made are, well, uh, you know, going back to the front, you said, well, there's going to be like kind of there's a underlying technological build out happening with hardware now, but then like it's not like there's going to be one single system that like does everything for enterprise SaaS software. There's going to be tons of applications built. Who's going to build those applications? Well, they're going to be startups and they're going to hire who? They're going to hire people probably more than the kind of you call them white collar in our today's language, but we don't even know what their skills are going to be in the year's future. And there's going to be need for talent acquisition to do that. Completely agree. But we're in a drought right now, right? Where it's like talent acquisition isn't as always strongest in the construction, manufacturing kind of hardware space as it is in the white collar space at the moment. But again, I think you all are innovative. There's a lot of innovative people in our space. And then the first thing you said, Bill, going to the front was like, hey, I think this build out and like just in AI in general is a good thing for talent acquisition. I agree with that too. And I think it's good because the thing that will change is TA being like a high volume hiring mass market paradigm. And maybe some of you have already shifted this towards this to be more of like, I get compensated on a take rate, like from the cost of this talent's income. So in other words, like Indeed's already talking pretty explicitly about this. It's not about like, hey, I want like, I'm not in the market to get like you as, Acme Corporation, 100 applicants or 10 hires for these kind of lower paid occupations. What really makes Indeed money, or other job boards would be like, I'm trying to hire a machine learning engineer where the take rate as a percentage is maybe even higher, but like the total income that the value given by the TA is, far in excess of those 10 easy to fill roles. It's the hard to fill role. There's always going to be hard to fill roles, and that's where TA has a job.
That's so good. A great question, Bill. And I think that'll have to be our last one, Andrew. I mean, once again, my friend, just crushed it. I mean, I think people's heads are a little bit exploded. So we're probably going to have to unpack a lot of this. What I'm taking away from this, for everybody's benefit, was what I hoped I would take away. I didn't know, because the data is the data. And it sounds to me, if 50K is the new normal, like that data point is going to keep me awake tonight. Like if the labor supply, guys, has come down, that's reality, immigration policy, so on, then the new normal might be a different paradigm of growth. Like 100,000
Yes.
jobs being added in January, February is maybe more like 250 in 2018, right? Am I saying that right, Andrew? Am I thinking about that the right way?
Yeah, you may see in the coming months, like if I come back here in 6 months, I may have to revise that break-even rate. There's even some economists, again, we'll see what the data tells us next month. There's some economists who think that maybe even the break-even rate, this is weird to think of, could be negative. Meaning
Yeah.
the amount of deportation and lack of inflow of immigration and the aging population of people retiring is shrinking the labor force so fast that the rate you need to stabilize the unemployment rate is actually job declines. And that if we
Wow.
had
So,
zero jobs, if we just keep payroll employment flat, the unemployment rate will keep declining. So
and you still had to hire a lot of people to do that, right? I mean, it's not like our
yeah,
jobs
yeah,
are going away, guys.
exactly. A zero number, a zero where payroll employment stays flat, that masks all the gross changes of hiring and dynamics that are happening in the labor market. So I know we're out of time, and I appreciate you having me. Happy to come back again later this year, and I'll share the deck, the PDF of all the charts. And I know there's some questions in the chat from Brent, from others about like industry specific questions. Please reach out to us at appcast.io if you're interested. We'll help you out. That's all really the bulk of my team that we do is like I'm trying to hire forklift drivers in Chicago. I'm trying to hire registered nurses in Los Angeles. Like that's what we do. So yeah.
Awesome.
Thanks so
Thank you so
much,
much.
Andrew.